I've traveled and spoken a lot about at-risk troubled youth. And I have talked about the facilities and group homes in America. And, we're a country that sends people overseas to work with orphans and street kids. But we have street kids and orphans here. And the orphans are all in placements and foster homes and residential facilities. And we also have street kids. I was on the streets as an older teen for a period of time. So it's definitely something that we as a society, as a culture, that we really need to take seriously.
Hello, I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. And for all those people from around the world saying, okay, we know where Canada is. British Columbia on the West Coast, right? Right. And we have a big city there called Vancouver. Well, yes, we are 500 miles north or 800 kilometers north of Vancouver. In our city, living in harmony with nature. Black bears, grizzly bears, caribou, deer, you name them, they're all around us. And so today, a very, very special guest on our podcast. Her name is Rebecca Armstead, and Rebecca is a trauma-informed author, speaker, a master certified professional coach with a master degree in organizational leadership. Very interesting bio. She has over 20 years experience working with at-risk youth and survivors of abuse. Rebecca was dedicated her career to empowering struggling teens and young adults, transforming their lives. Rebecca, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me. It is exciting to be here.
So tell us about your background, Rebecca. Where are you from originally? Obviously, you had a tough time in the past. So, but first give us your background and then bring us through your past, then your education, and to where we are today.
Yeah, sure. So I was born in the state of West Virginia in Appalachia, America, but I actually was raised in New York. So I grew up in the state of New York, in multiple cities in New York, mainly because I was in the foster care system. So from a pretty early age, because of the abuse in my home, there was physical abuse, emotional abuse, and there was alcoholism. I experienced sexual abuse as a child. So after going through so much trauma as a young child, I ended up in the system in New York. So I went from foster home to foster home. I spent time in group homes, youth psychiatric centers or hospitals, and then several very large placements, including, which was the last placement I was at, was an all-girls lockup. So there were probably about 400 girls in that place, and I was there for 3 years.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was a long time. I feel like it's the core memory of my childhood is being in that place. And there were
So,
girls from all, oh, go ahead.
yeah. So, question, Rebecca, how old were you when you went into foster care?
I was about 10, maybe 10,
Yeah.
11.
Yeah.
I was in West Virginia
Yeah.
until about 4 years old, and then was in New York, living with my mother and grandparents, but then went into the system at about 11, 10 or 11.
Coming from your parents or from your mother and your grandparents. So,
Yeah, from
did
my
you,
mother and my grandparents.
yeah, did you have siblings that in the family with you that
Yeah,
went
so
through?
I had a sister
Right.
that lived there as well, and I have several half siblings because my father was actually married I want to say 7 or 8 times. And so there, I have many half siblings from my father, but my father and my mother, there were three of us. So my brother, he was in placements before I was. He was taken from the home because of outbursts of anger and just a lot of struggles that he had. And of course, he was suffering trauma as well. So he wasn't in the home for the most part. And then I have a sister who was there, and she actually stayed in the home after I left.
Older than you or younger than you?
He's younger, and my brother is older than me.
Right. Okay. And then C stayed after you were put into foster care?
Yeah, she was the youngest of us, and I think it was just probably easier for my mother. My mother had come from a lot of trauma herself, and I think um, just looking back on all of it, just trying to have grace, and I do have grace for her. I think having the three of us with all of our issues and struggles was just too much for her. But my sister was younger, and I think that just having my sister there was much easier and doable for her. So yes, my sister stayed until she was an older teenager, and then had various struggles of her own, and went off and did her own thing.
So the one thing that so before I kind of ask you about what age were the last comment you made is you were for about 3 or 4 years in a group home of about 400. I didn't quite get
Yeah,
what, yeah, what was
yeah,
that?
yeah. So it is called in America a youth residential facility. So this is bigger than a group home. A
Okay.
group home is going to be, maybe 12 kids. So
Okay.
a residential facility is typically for kids that are really hard to control. And because I had a lot of severe behavioral issues, I was eventually put in that place. So there were girls that had committed pretty significant crimes and girls that just ran away from every place that they were put at. So they landed there. Yeah, but about 400 of us on
So,
11 different units.
so uh, sorry if I don't fully understand. Sounds like a Yale to me.
Uh, you mean like a it's called it's like a lockup. It's almost
L-
like a
That's what.
prison.
Yeah, that's what I'm.
Yeah.
That's the point. That it feels like a prison to me.
Yes, we had everything was locked down. We had high fences. We were not obviously allowed out into the community. It was so structured from the time we woke up to the time we went to bed was controlled. And if were out of line in any way, there were major consequences, sometimes physical restraint, isolation, all kinds of various approaches
I
that
don't.
I consider looking back not helpful.
Yeah. So that's what I was going to conclude. Obviously we are in Canada here, but I'm not familiar with anything like that. Does that still exist in the United States? Facilities like that?
Yes, there are facilities in every state of America, and they are probably a mix of state run and federal run
Okay.
facilities.
And dealing with all young aged individuals in particular, because you could not have been that old. You probably were either in your late teens or early 20s at the best.
Yeah, I went into that place at about 14, probably almost 15, and left when I was 17. That place was 13 to 18, but there are prisons, if you will, youth facilities for children, probably as young as 5, 6, depending on the level of behavioral issues. Usually in those facilities, we're talking small children that attack their parents with a knife or something. So we're talking extreme behavioral struggles.
But a lot of it could be because of issues that include a lot of things, including uh, the issues that you raise in your bio, and neurodivergent issues,
Yeah. Mhm.
likely, but not criminal in the sense of crime, if you wish, maybe difficult to manage, but not in all cases criminal, and they would end
Yeah.
up. Yeah, that's troubling to say the least.
Yeah, I like to, I speak about this. I've traveled and spoken a lot about at-risk troubled youth, and I have talked about the facilities and group homes in America. And we're a country that sends people overseas to work with orphans and street kids, but we have street kids and orphans here. And the orphans are all in placements and foster homes and residential facilities. And we also have street kids. I was on the streets as an older teen for a period of time. So it's definitely something that we as a society, as a culture, that we really need to take seriously.
Right. Okay. So then, as you went through this and had the difficult time as you were young, and then in your late teens, then when you were 17, you were, if you wish, released, and then, well, then you really had no place. I'm just, looking at it and saying you came from there for, after you've been there for 3 to 4 years, and you really didn't have any place to go, really, did you?
No, I didn't have the skills that I needed, and I didn't have anywhere to go. So when they released me, I had a court date, and I was taken to court, and the my behavior was so, I mean, they labeled me as out of control. So my behavior was so poor that they didn't even want to take me back. They didn't want to keep me. And of course, my mother didn't want anything to do with me, and the state didn't know what to do. So basically, they emancipated me. They just released me, made me a legal adult at the age of 17, and I was just released, and had no idea what to do. And that whole next year, um, was just horrifically traumatic. So I can share some of that if you'd like me to.
So where did they release you? Was it in New York, in
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
region? And so they just said, goodbye, Rebecca. You have to go to court next week, and you're gonna go to court. And as they made their case in regards to, they say she's a lost cause, put it out of there. We don't know what to do. Let's hope for the best. Goodbye.
Well, actually, the lockup that I was in did not let me know that they were not taking me back. That was a surprise to me at court. In fact, the
Right.
judge looked at the person, the staff, and they said, "You cannot release her with nowhere to go. Where is she going?" And they said, "We're not taking her back. That's not our problem." And there was nothing, that could be done. So yes, I was released, and this is not a unique case. This happens, quite frequently with older teenagers in the system that are close to aging out. So they're getting closer to 18, and these placements don't want to deal with them. They'll just kick them out.
You call it aging out. That
Mhm.
means, that one day I'm 17 and the next day I'm 18, and it's a question of numbers. No, it doesn't
Mhm.
matter what my situation is, neurodiversity, maybe it is autism, maybe ADHD, maybe a combination of all the above, is saying, no, no, yesterday you were 17, tomorrow you're 18, goodbye, get out of here.
Goodbye. Yeah,
Goodbye.
no skill, no knowledge
Not my
of anything.
problem.
And like you're saying, no self-awareness.
No.
So interestingly, talking about neurodivergence, I was undiagnosed but autistic and had ADHD. And having worked with at-risk and troubled kids for as long as I have now, um, I would say that there is a significant amount of them that at the very least have some varying degree of ADHD. And it's, it's very difficult.
Now, you already know, likely, maybe you don't, but I'm ADHD, and I call it a
Yeah.
superpower, actually.
Mhm.
So it's to me not a liability, but it's a benefit in my case, and I
Mhm.
speak about it a lot, and so, but the issues to me are very, very important in terms of understanding neurodiversity, whatever that may be, a combination of ADHD, autism, maybe the in a number of other things that very slowly we becoming gradually more aware of it as a society, that a substantial portion of our population, ADHD may be as high as 30% across the board, portraying it differently between males and females. Obviously, autism, spectrum disorder, autism as we know it, is very widely an issue, but no reason now to not being able to function in some ways. And a lot of people with neurodivergent issues that are not being attended to, are not always successful in, and being, I hate to say, accepted in society as to what they are. I say I can speak for myself. I'm different, and but that does
Yeah.
not mean I cannot function. And obviously, in my case, I'm just saying that not to say how special am I, but it took me a long time to figure out, probably 50 years, to figure out that at the age of 62, I was diagnosed as ADHD. Up to that
Mhm.
point, since the time I was 12 and a half, and academically was not successful in school, and when I was born in Holland, I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 7 3 times and became a laborer at the age of 12 and a half. It was not until I was 62, nearly 50 years, wondering, who am I? and and
Yeah.
and but even so, that since that time, I'm an author. I've written 6 books, and I have 10 different companies, and I'm not bragging about it. I'm simply making the case. Neurodivergent, if you wish, and I'm part of them, does not mean you cannot be successful. It's just the opposite, actually, is that a lot of
Yeah.
people that are immensely successful in entrepreneurs and business people, probably up to, I believe, more than 50% of them are
Mhm.
ADHD, and are very, very successful. So,
Yeah, ADHD can be I kind of compare it to like a power tool. So if you have a power tool and it's plugged in properly and you know how to use it, it is much better than a hammer, right? So you're going to do the job well. But if you don't have it plugged in right, you don't even know that you have it in your hands and you think it's a hammer, then it's going to be a big mess. Oh, that's awesome.
yeah, I wrote that book. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
very popular.
yeah, I'll have to check that out. I have some ADHD books.
Yeah.
Um,
So the book that that actually I'm just going to mention that, is that I was in Holland, and then that's where I was born. Came to Canada in 1965, and I was 23, and it took me 32 years until I found. I never knew. I was successful in the things that I was doing, but it was not until I went into a bookstore and I picked up a book that probably changed my life. And the book's title is, this is the actual book, Driven to Distraction. And the book was,
I know that book.
and you know it, and the
Yeah.
book was written by Dr. Hollywell, a medical doctor, professor, well known, has written 18 books, 5 of them about distraction. He is ADHD, and so when I picked up this book, I still don't know why I did it. This is the actual book I picked up in January of 1997, after I had been here
Mm.
for 32 years already in Canada, and I wrote in the book in Dutch. Now I finally know who I am, and I wrote it in Dutch because
Mm.
there was people would say that that ADHD is a mental disorder. Obviously, I don't agree
Mhm.
with that, but there was still
Yeah.
stigma around it. There is still to a certain extent now, but less so now. But it changed my life, this book. And the other thing that I did that you may find interesting, you on my podcast number 366, Dr. Halliwell, very popular, globally known, ADHD, is a professor, has dyslexia, so do I, and ADHD. I had him on my podcast number 203, On the Brink. I had an interview with Dr. Halliwell. Can you imagine how the world goes around after all those years? And so, as
Yeah.
we had the discussion, I believe I suggested to Dr. Hollywell, and obviously he's the expert, but I lived it, that I believe that 20% of the population probably ADHD. He said, no, John, probably 25%. And I agree
Mm.
with them. Male, female portray it differently, obviously. And then the other part that I suggested to him during our podcast, On the Brink podcast with him, is that I've been in business for a long time. I have been on board of directors. I know a lot of successful business people, and I suggested to him that in my mind, that probably 50% of successful entrepreneurs or business person, and the operative is successful ones, probably 50% of them
Mm.
are ADHD. He said, no, John, probably 75%. And I agree with him. So uh, so that's I would just wanted to share that with you is that so take us further with you and then so after you went through that difficult period, so obviously you were then starting to change your life gradually but still going, and again I looked at your bio and you've gone through a lot of difficult periods, even after you went after 18 and went through your adult period of life. When started,
Yeah.
when did things start to change for you in the direction of knowing yourself and reconciling? For me, it always has been. It took me till I was 62 years old knowing who
Wow.
am I. It was not until then that I really knew after I read that book and I got the diagnosis from ADHD.
Mm. Yeah, I think there's a twofold thing here. When did I start to turn my life around and figure out who I was? I would say it happened twice. Once when I was younger, which I'll get into, when I actually began to turn my life around, and then when I was diagnosed, with ADHD and autism in my early 40s.
Right.
So but when I was young, after having been on the streets in New York and miraculously escaping exploitation and just experiencing, I mean, just trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma, violence and rape, and being shot at. I still have a scar on my finger from stuff ricocheting off of a building when I was shot at. Not intentionally at me, but I just happened to be in a place where there was a drive-by shooting. So lots of trauma. I ended up getting pregnant out of rape, and it was that pregnancy. So because of that pregnancy, an aunt and uncle in the Dallas, Texas area knew that I was pregnant and knew that I was homeless and how physically sick I was. My hair was falling out. I was eating. At one point, I was eating dog food out of a can because I was starving and I had no access to food. I mean, that's how destitute and low my life was. And so my aunt was in a grocery store one day and overheard a conversation between two people about that one of the women's nieces who was in a maternity home in another part of Texas. And that maternity home was Christian. And so they were talking about this. But what caught my aunt's attention was one of them said that they don't force the girls or require the girls to place their babies for adoption. So that's when my aunt interrupted because she knew that nobody was going to force me to do anything. So they gave her the phone number. She contacted that maternity home and they said, well, initially they were like, we're not set up to take a girl off the streets. Most of our girls come from families and, we're homeschooled, just kind of like more sheltered girls. And so initially it was, no, we can't take her. But a couple days later, the director of that ministry called my aunt and said, I don't know, who this girl is, but I can't get her out of my mind. She's supposed to be here. We'll take her. And so that I was rescued off of the streets in New York and went down to that maternity home. And I'll pause there and let you ask anything you want to ask. But those experiences after that, which really takes me into what I do now, was what began to transform me.
So they transferred you to Texas from New York.
Well, I went on a Greyhound bus. Yeah, my aunt bought a Greyhound bus
Okay.
ticket, and I traveled for 4 days from New York to Texas.
To where in Texas? Dallas or where?
Yeah, I was in Dallas for about 3 or 4 weeks because I was very sick. And so my aunt is a nurse, and so she got me to, into a lot of doctor's appointments, medical care, and before I went into the maternity home because I
That
was pretty
was
sick.
that was the click for you that brought you to the other side, right? Otherwise, you could have gone down further, and God only knows what would have happened.
Yeah, I don't think I would be alive today
No,
if I hadn't been rescued.
yeah.
Yeah.
So then, so now you have family,
Mhm.
right? Your aunt that is helping you and so what happened then from that point forward? Now you're starting to recover to a certain extent. So take us from there.
Yeah. So when I was in that maternity home, I was a rough kid. So I was surrounded by staff that were very loving. I remember significantly being impacted by the fact that the staff were volunteering there. They did not get paid because my whole excuse and justification for always having been rude to staff in homes, residential facilities, were that they were only paid to be there. But these people are volunteering to be with us. So that was transformative for me. That really impacted me. And then no matter how bad I was, how rude I was, how vulgar I was, how, my behavior, they really saw everything that I did or said as an opportunity to teach me something, show me a better way, and love me in the midst. Like accept me for the whole of me, both the potential and the messy. So I had a very fragmented sense of self. And so that was when, if you will, like the self, I didn't even know the process I was in, and it's the process I use today with youth. But that very initial thing of self-awareness and bringing a cohesiveness to the self.
How old were
And
you
that,
then? How old were you then, Rebecca?
yeah, I was pretty close to 19. I
Okay.
turned 19
Okay.
right before I had the baby.
Okay.
So yeah, so that process began, and I had my son in July of that year. It was 1996, and kept him for a few months. I really wanted to keep him. I felt this sense of like this is the first human being that is like true family and loves me. But I realized how broken I was, and made the really painful decision to place him for adoption. And that whole story is miraculous too, finding the family and just all of it. So, do you want me to continue on?
Yeah, 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 I do.
Okay. All right. So I placed him for adoption. And then for about a year, I lived with my aunt and then another family in Tyler, Texas. and just recovered. I was in therapy. I was, yeah, I worked a little job, and just kind of did life normal for a minute, but not normal. Like I was really struggling. But during all of that time, I was watching people demonstrate a life of, um, innovation, creativity, industriousness, having self leadership, taking accountability, personal responsibility, having an entrepreneurial mindset. I was surrounded by people like this. And it was unknowingly, unbeknownst to me, was really impacting the way that I viewed the world. Up until that point, everything was a trigger. So you did something, it triggered me. If I reacted, it's your fault. If there's a challenge or a problem, I can't do it. I can't. But being surrounded by people who had that opportunity mindset really began to change the way I viewed the world.
A whole new
And so,
perspective, right?
yes, but I didn't know it was happening. Like,
No.
I can sit here and tell you that there was a gradual thing that was happening inside of me that I was not aware of. So after about a year, I ended up going into this program, the same Christian program that ran the maternity home I was in. And I was through them, I was able to travel, and contribute. So having contribution to society.
Were
So
you
we would
still in
go and we,
Tyler then in at that point?
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but we traveled. We traveled
Right.
throughout the U.S. I went to places like Russia, and we
Oh,
just
wow.
served. So now I'm going around and I'm serving others. I'm
Yeah.
building things. I'm cleaning houses and churches and buildings. I'm washing, you know, toilets in places that I'm like, where am, I mean, just going around serving and contributing to others. And that was transformative. Did you want to
Yes.
say
Yeah.
something?
No, 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 no. I agree with you. No, no. Keep going.
Yeah. So,
I love it.
um, yeah, traveled. I served for a period of time. And then as I began to mature and I guess kind of like move away from some of the um, attitudes and things that I had had, but I didn't even really realize was changing, but others could see in around me. I began to speak. So, people, this was another thing, like people in my life, leaders in my life, those that I looked at and looked up to that I thought, man, I could never be like them. They believed in me. They handed me the microphone. Share your story. Share what's on your heart for these people. So we would be at an orphanage, or we would be at in, a village, and there would be, tremendous hurt because of various issues. And then here I am, straight off the streets of New York, not even a year and a half earlier. And these people that I look up to are believing in me and handing me a microphone. I mean, I can't even tell you. Again, I didn't realize it, but the change that was beginning to happen in me. So I began to speak and share my story. And then not just share my story, but share encouragement to others. Like, kind of like in those early days, it was kind of like, if I can do it, you can too. But I didn't really know how I was doing it. So I was like unaware of the process that was happening to me, but I was still sharing. So I did that for a while. And then after that season, I went and I lived near some friends that I'd made while traveling, and lived in South Dakota, the Black Hills of South Dakota,
Right.
for about 4.5 years. And that's pretty close to Canada, actually.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a beautiful
yeah,
area.
actually, yeah, so when I visited BC, British Columbia, Vancouver area was during the time that I lived in South Dakota. A friend of mine drove from the Black Hills where Mount Rushmore is all the way across up into Vancouver. It was an amazing drive. Um, so during that time in South Dakota, it was like a season where I was learning, I was taken out of this adventurous bubble of traveling and speaking, and now I'm just in this beautiful little town with people who had, normal jobs or were in school, and we all did normal things. So I got a job. I wasn't quite ready to go to school at that point.
How old were you
Friends
there?
in
How old were you there, Rebecca?
21, 22.
Still very young,
Um,
right?
yeah. So I wasn't ready to go to school, and my friends were all in school in college, and they're like, "Oh, but you should." But I had a sense that I wasn't ready, and if I attempted it, I was going to fail. I was not going to be able to succeed at it, and I'm glad I didn't do it.
Right,
I'm glad I waited.
right.
So I just worked, and I was in therapy still, and just being kind of like coached, mentored, discipled. Right? You go to church, and you have people that kind of speak into your life, and really grew as like I feel like that season was growing in the way that I communicated, growing in the way that I understood relationships. So contribution, right, is not just about going out and doing these radical efforts of contribution. There's contribution in relationships. So we don't
Yes,
enter into friendships with the idea of gain. We
right.
enter into friendship with the idea of collaboration, negotiation, and contribution. So we give and we receive. And sometimes we give more and sometimes we receive more. So I was learning all of that during that time and what it is to have a job and to be trained, right? And to learn skills, skills that I would take into my future. Um, so I was there for about, I don't know, a couple of years. And from
So,
there
so,
I
so,
came,
so it was kind of like starting over, right? And trying to the
yeah.
time that you spend in New York, especially the 4 years that you spent in prison, I'm gonna call it, and
Mhm.
and all the stuff that happened before. How can you kind of reconcile that in some form of fashion to feel for you that you are ready for the next step? That's where you are now in your
Yeah.
discussion. So share with us how you go forward from you're still in North Dakota, you're starting to settle down in the farm, debating if you should go back to school, being not quite ready but understanding as to why not, and getting ready to then for a couple of years and then go to get your schooling, education, and
Mhm.
starting to put a direction on to where do I go from here, but will it look like without that other stuff, the bad stuff that happened, but at least
Mhm.
understanding opportunities, but also likely, correct me if I am wrong, is saying that you have some unique abilities that you discovered and others did
Mhm.
help you in that process that gave you direction.
Yeah. I would say that coming out of that season, I began to recognize the purpose because no matter what I did, like for work or with the local church or with friend, like I always ended up working with youth and young adults that were struggling, and typically working with those with, the more extreme patterns of behavior and thinking, some of which honestly can end up into abusive pathologies, in adulthood. So I just always was drawn, no matter what I did, I just always found myself working with youth and young adults. And that could be me just going and hanging out downtown in a parking lot with pizza and hacky sacks and like hanging out with kids that didn't even know me, but building relationship with them and just saying, hey, like there's people that care about you. There's people here that see you and want to know you and want to help you in your young life. So I think when I left South Dakota and I moved to where I am now, which is the Kansas City area, I began to understand kind of like my core belief, if you will. It's a thing that I talk about and I work, with others to help them develop is like what their core beliefs are about how the world should be. And that can be something very specific. And so I was beginning to see that my core beliefs were really rooted in troubled, written off youth. other people just write them off. There's no hope for them. Um, that there is hope for them and that they are capable of overcoming incredible trauma and patterns of behavior and developing new life-giving patterns. So I discovered that in that time. And when I came to the Kansas City area, um, I would say that like it was a combination in my early years here of getting a little bit older, having more work experience with youth because I continued to work with youth, and then school. So that was like this desire in me. Okay, so I have this purpose in me. I have these core beliefs in me, but I don't really know what I'm doing here. So initially, I thought, you know what, I'm going to go and I'm going to get a degree in psychology. So I went to school and I began the process of pursuing a master's in psychology, and I was going to be a clinical therapist. But as I went along, the old school way of thinking in psychology is to kind of like focus on what's happened to you and work through those struggles and then learn coping skills and maybe take medication to help with those things. I am a supporter of medication for those who need it. I want to clarify that.
Yeah.
But I wasn't feeling like this was the message I wanted. This was not who I was. So I switched majors when I discovered this degree called organizational leadership because and I have a master's in this. So basically it's all about like leadership, leading self and leading others through inspiration, motivation, and I guess bringing, like, helping others through a process of coming into their own and overcoming obstacles through an entrepreneurial mindset. And I was like, that is what I want to do. So I switched majors. I was in school quite a while, switched majors, and went into the path of organizational leadership.
So organizational leadership, was that a course they taught in University of Kansas City, or where did you take it?
Yeah, they actually don't. They may offer it now, but they
Yeah,
didn't then. I had to
because I
actually do
heard
my,
about that.
yeah.
Universities providing that particular niche, at least not in
Mhm.
Canada, but so where did you take it then?
I had to do my master's online with a university, a very large, incredible university in New Hampshire
Okay,
that offered that program online because it was a very new program at the
okay.
time. There were only a couple universities that offered it. Now you can find this degree in a lot of big universities. I think even the Ivy League schools now have organizational leadership as a major. But yeah, so I did my undergrad in psychology and business classes as I switched into the entrepreneurial and leadership avenue here in Kansas City, and then did that online.
So quite quite a journey, Rebecca, but it probably, although things were difficult and challenging, but it laid, I presume, because I had, in a different way, a foundation that was challenging and difficult, but it laid a foundation for who you are today. And you probably couldn't be as effective as you are today unless, and it's hard to say, that this didn't give you the exposure and that you did not have those experiences. You understand better than most than, between your personal experiences, your education, obviously, and you spent a lot of time getting your master's in the area, gave you where you are today, which is, so share with us what you're doing today and in terms of your background, but your experience, and especially neurodivergency. It's still, even for me, if I look back, it's still emerging as being accepted as part of who we are globally, still not quite recognized to where it should be, but at least the door is opening for because of people like you and I would hope like myself being very vocal about it on podcasting globally because it is our global issues. They're not
Yeah.
unique to the United States, Canada, but they are global issues. And that's where I believe podcasting in particular,
Mhm.
which is still in its early stages, in my view, is still emerging as what I call the new media, where
Mhm.
people like you and me are sitting here talking about challenging issues that affected you, me, and others that are being touched by neurodivergency in a number
Yeah.
of areas, but are functioning well because not only do we understand it, it's made us both successful in a way, but sharing it with others and seeing avenues where we can show others that there is hope and opportunity and podcasting has helped us in that process because
Yeah.
you're also a speaker, you're an author obviously as well as I do, but there is nothing as powerful as podcasting because while you and me are doing our presentation, which will be released later today around the world, we already know, and I'm not bragging about this, but I know that millions of people will watch us around the world. I know that, so that the and so that's the new media. That's why this is so important, and that's why it is so interesting for the people watching us, for you and me to have this discussion, you being very candid about the things that have happened to you and how it took you forward to where you are today. So share with us also as to what do you do now today, and as you look back, and as well as obviously we looked back already in a number of ways, but as you and particularly as you go forward, how do you see it?
Mm. Okay. So, what I do today is I work with youth and young adults. Sometimes I work with older adults, but typically, again, I'm always, it's just always led back to youth and young adults. And I continue to work with youth and young adults that either are uh, struggling in the midst of neurodivergence, not knowing how to utilize those gifts that they have to live brilliant lives. So I help them through that journey and process. And then I also work with youth with, again, severe destructive patterns of behavior and thinking. And interestingly, when I was diagnosed with autism and ADHD, I was in school, coming towards the end of my degree, and that led me on a journey of really researching ADHD and autism. And I have, obviously with the psychology background, I didn't know about these things, but I ended up going and getting some more certifications and training in various aspects of ADHD and helping people with ADHD and autism. And one of the things that you know, just with all my years of experience, that I am beginning to conclude is that, like we talked about earlier, a lot of people that have these severe struggles of patterns of behavior and thinking have undiagnosed levels of neurodivergence, more frequently ADHD, because again, it's like a power tool. And when you don't know how to use it, or it's been damaged, or then it's a power tool. So it's going to be, it's not going to be this thing that brings you life and success. It's going to be destructive. Um, the same thing with autism. And so I also have some certifications in working with youth that struggle with the beginning stages of personality disorders like narcissism. histrionic, borderline, avoidant, antisocial. And I am seeing patterns, and actually, the literature, the clinical literature, is beginning to show both in brain scans and in evaluations and working with these young people that a lot of them, at the core of them, have undiagnosed neurodivergence. And you know what? It excites me because I'm like, we're entering into a new phase of not only this next generation growing up knowing that they have ADHD is a superpower, that they can use it for great things, and that autism is incredible. People with autism are incredible problem solvers. They see patterns. They are highly intelligent, hard workers, I mean, they're just incredible, right? So there's incredible giftings with these. But when there is trauma, abuse in the home, and these horrific backgrounds that a lot of these kids go through, it really causes a very what I call a fragmentation of the core self. And when you have neurodivergence and it's fragmented, all kinds of things can happen. And so it is my heart, whether the kid or young adult is neurodivergent or not, to help bring back the cohesive sense of self. That is looking at the messy and the magnificent. So all of the gifting, all of the talents, all of the accomplishments, the good things they've done, discovering their core beliefs, discovering their purpose and their passions, but also being aware of and recognizing and understanding the messy. So the poor choices they have made, the damaging, destructive choices they have made, being able to talk about them and take ownership of them, but also recognizing that those things are opportunities to go and contribute and to help others overcome. So we're going to get you out of the fire. We're going to help you bring yourself back to a cohesive sense of self. We're going to learn some skills. We're going to learn mindset skills. So we're going to move from a trigger mindset to an opportunity mindset. And then through that, I mean, there's a system that I use that I take you through. And basically, by the end of it, they are walking in a way that where there is confidence, where there is a peace. They've made a peace with the choices that they've made in the past. They made a peace with what has happened to them and the damage that was done to them, and that they may always walk with a little bit of a limp, right, because of what they've been through. But they also understand that they can take all of that and they can go and pull others out of the fire. They can go and they can teach others. And so it's taking the very things that they're ashamed of, that they've hidden, that they've denied, that they've gotten in trouble for, and using those things, bringing them into the light and using them to empower others. And it's like an incredible process. And it really is, what I have seen is highly successful versus old school. Let's talk about the past. No, okay, we know the past, we know what you've been through, we can see what you've done, but let's take what you've got, what you're capable of, your purpose, your vision, your core beliefs, all of those things, and let's begin to build. Let's begin to build and create new patterns, because when you create the new patterns, especially that entrepreneurial mindset, which is key, you automatically will break the destructive patterns. It just happens. When you try to clean up the mess, but you don't put nothing in its place, the mess is going to come back. But when you replace the mess with those other things, it automatically goes away and you're building a whole new life.
So, in a way, Rebecca, is that you are in a way becoming, and others, including myself, that been through trauma of all kinds of different sorts, where there are turning points that happen that made you carry the things that had happened to you when you were 17, put on the
Yeah.
street. It was your aunt in Tyler, Texas,
Mhm.
circumstantial by accident, noticed and kind of pulled you out where you could have gone down. That
Yeah.
gave you the key to become what you are today, really. And
Yeah,
and
I look
and
back.
and and that is your role now, and to a certain extent,
Yeah.
my role as well. That's why we speak about neurodivergency. It's
Mhm.
not a liability. It's
Mhm.
understanding it, make it work for you. But in order for you to do effective what you're doing today, and for me the same, the things that were very, very difficult have become a foundation that has given me
Yeah.
and you the ability to speak and help others. And the vehicle is, in our case in particular, so effective because we are both writers and authors, and we are doing presentations. But there is nothing more effective than podcasting, in my mind, and doing podcasts like we are doing today, that will be seen globally and around the world, and hopefully will touch on people that had that role to a certain extent. But your hand is say there is hope, and there are people
Yeah.
that are better understanding it, and things are changing, and they are slower than it should be. And for my patients, and I'm
Mhm.
sure yours is, but we at least can do as much as we can do. Rebecca, it was an amazing, amazing podcast. I want to stay in touch with you, and
Yeah.
obviously we could speak for another hour at
Mhm.
least, but let's make sure we stay in touch. And this
Yes, yes,
podcast will
definitely.
be released later on today. And for all those people watching us from around the world, subscribe to our podcast, because it gives both Rebecca and myself encouragement to do more of these podcasts, communicate with people around the world, because these issues are global,
Yeah.
and it is so important to share our experiences with others, and then share it with others, and like it. And again, Rebecca, it was a privilege and a pleasure to have an interaction with you. Let's make sure we stay in touch.
For sure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Rebecca. You take care now.
Bye.
Bye bye.